Hey, what's up everybody? I'd like to welcome you to another Maximilian tutorial in openFrameworks. Now, just to recap on what our last tutorial covered, what we did was we set up a simple sine wave oscillator which goes through our speaker output. So we just set up our speakers to receive any sort of sound that we input into it, and then we just put it through our outputs. And we also set our sample rate and our buffer size and the frequency of our oscillator, which is 200 hertz. So what we're going to do today is we're now going to work on triggering the sine wave using an ADSR envelope. Now I'm going to assume, since this is a more advanced course, that you know what an ADSR envelope is. So I'm not going to go over that today. So we're going to route the sound into an ADSR envelope, and then we're going to basically use that to trigger our sine wave on and off. And then if we have time, we might map the mouse to the frequency or set up a quick GUI to control the shaping of our sound using the ADSR envelope. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. So one thing that I've found through using Maximilian and different add-ons and so forth is that, you know, some of this stuff, you know, you really find out just through experience and through trial and error, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, so on and so forth. And so you'll see what I mean in just a moment. If I go into the add-on itself and then I click on the OFX Maxim header file, as I've reviewed before, these type defs are deriving from our regular Maximilian C++ files here that we see below. And then we see, so we want an envelope, and we see that there's one here called Maxi Envelope. Okay, now if I click in here, I want an ADSR envelope, and I can see that this is not what I need. Okay, it's talking about period output, start value, so on and so forth. That's not what I need. I need a actual ADSR envelope. Okay, so if we just click into the main Maximilian header file, then if I Command F to search within the header file itself, I type in ADSR, see if anything comes up, and we'll see that there's another class here called MaxiEnv, okay, which is, and then we have a couple functions here to call on our ADSR envelope. Okay, just something you kind of find out through experience. Now, another thing that I found through experience is that when using the ADSR envelope, when I've used this function here, where the ADSR times are instantiated within the function itself, it just doesn't seem to work properly for me. I mean, it triggers and everything, but I can't seem to get any sort of intuition as far as what these numbers actually mean. Okay, I'm assuming that they must be values between 0 and 1. I did some experimentation with them. I couldn't seem to kind of suss it out. But I found that it was more effective when I called on this function that just took an input and whether it was triggering or not. And then I set the ADSR times separately using these functions down here, set attack, set release, so on and so forth. And then those times are set in milliseconds, okay? Not sure what these other ones are set in, or maybe, I don't know. So that's how we're going to do it today. We're just going to use this function here, and then we're going to set the ADSR times using these functions below. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. So this is a MaxiEnv, so let's just set up a MaxiEnv object. Okay, MaxiEnv, we'll just call this envelope. Okay. Now, what we need to do is we need to actually route the sound. So at the moment we have this sine wave that we've called my sound, okay, and that's a sound that's always playing continuously, okay? And that is routed into our outputs, our speaker outputs, okay? So if we just leave this as it is, if I just compile quickly, what we'll hear is just the sine wave playing all the time. Okay, great. So what we need now is we need a way that we can trigger that note on and off, and that's going to happen using our envelope. Okay, so we called it envelope. Okay, and then we just want to set up an ADSR. As I said, I'm going to use this method here from trial and error. Okay, so our input. Okay, so our input is what sound are we putting into it? We're going to be putting in our sine wave sound. So we've got my sound. And then the trigger is just whether the sound is triggering or not, okay? Which is something that we're going to have to control using either a key or maybe like the mouse press, mouse released functions. But I'm just going to set that. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a variable for that. So this is a variable of type int. I'm just going to call this trigger. Okay. And then in my header file, I'll just set up an int. I'm just going to call that trigger. It's always good to set an initial value for the variable. So we'll just call this, we'll just set it to 0 for now, which means that it's not playing. Okay, so we're all good there. So now what we have is we have the sine wave sound. It's going into the envelope. Okay, now we need to get the envelope into our output. Okay, so let's just call this a float variable. Okay, so we can call it a float variable because these are just numbers that are going into the speakers. Okay, so we'll just call this OSC output. Okay, and then we're just going to change this to OSC output. So just keep in mind that, you know, what we're getting at the end of this all is just a series of values between -1 and 1, which are telling the speaker exactly where to move between -1 and 1. Okay, -1 being the back, moving as far back as it could possibly can, and +1 being as far forward. Okay, so that's exactly what it's telling. That's exactly what these numbers are telling our speaker to do at any given point. That's happening at a rate of 44,100 times a second. Okay, so back to where we were. So now we have our sound going into our envelope. We have our envelope going into our output. Okay, but if I compile, what will happen? Okay, we won't hear a thing. Okay, and that's because our trigger is set to 0. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to find a way to actually trigger this. Okay, so let's just use the space bar as our way of triggering the note on and off. Okay, so if we come down here to the key pressed function, we don't know what key the space bar is. Okay, so let's just do a quick std cout key just to see what key our space bar is. Okay, then if we just look in our console there on the bottom right, we'll see that it's key 32. So when I press the space bar here, that's key 32 that we need. Okay, so let's just put an if statement in here now. So if key is equal to 32, trigger equals 1. Okay, so now if we do this, okay, Okay, nothing happens still. Okay, and the reason that nothing is happening is because we haven't set our ADSR settings yet. Okay, if we haven't told the sound how we want it to attack, decay, sustain, so on, then it's not going to know what it needs to do. So I'm just going to put these envelope settings into update for now, because I think at some point I'm going to want that to change as the program's running. Okay, so so we'll just put this here for now. So envelope dot, okay, oh, here we go, set attack. Okay, as we saw earlier in the header file from Maximilian. So we just need number of seconds. I'm just going to set 10 milliseconds to attack, so it's going to attack right away. Now we just need to do that for our decay, sustain, and release. Set. Okay, and I'll just set this for, let's just say 500 milliseconds. Then envelope. Sustain. Now sustain is a little bit different for people that don't really do audio just yet. Sustain is normally a value between 0 and 1. Okay, so I'm just going to put 1 here, meaning that the sound is always sustaining as long as the key is held down. And then we got set release. I'll set the release to 1 second, which is 1000 milliseconds. Okay, so if we do that, we should hear a sound when I press the space bar. Okay, now we hear the sound, but now the sound stays on continuously. Okay, and that's because we haven't set up a key released what do they call that, key released action, can't remember what it's called exactly, event. That's what we want, key released event. So if we just put the same thing here, this should now set things up properly. Okay, great. I'm gonna hit the space bar now. Let's see what's happened here. Oh, I need to make this 0. My bad. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so great. Okay, we hear the sound. We hear that it has a 1 second release time. Okay, so since this video is a little bit long already, I'm just going to end things here. But what we'll do for the next one is we'll go ahead and maybe map this, the position of the mouse to the frequency, so we can go up and down the scale. And then what we'll also do is we'll set up a quick ADSR GUI using sliders from the openFrameworks GUI to actually be able to set the attack, release, and sustain times and control our sound a little bit more. So that's it for now, and see you next time.